So I became interested in the idea of demonstrating rate on stage, speed and differences of speed, rather than just medium or not moving or slow. And so I had a piece of equipment, a basic piece of equipment that had two rotating surfaces. So the middle rotating radius was 4 feet, and the larger one essentially was 10 feet. I wanted to see if I juxtaposed traveling, basically going nowhere in the 20-foot arena, but changing the speeds and the directions of the people on the center plug and the people on the outer plug. And it was a phenomenal epiphany, a revelation, how many things you could do within a very sequestered space, and how gorgeously confusing it was when you'd, for instance, dive off of the center plug onto the outer donut and start going immediately in the other direction. All of a sudden, a world of possibility and demonstrational capacity to show what does it mean when you actually are governed by the ground you're on, that it has its own will and its own ideology, and that even though you know you're going to land on a faster ground, for instance, going from the center plug to the outer donut, you know in your mind that when you land from the center plug to the outer donut, you know you're going to go in another direction slightly faster. And the idea would be that it gets timed in all these different iterations in such a way that there's not a body in your way. They're already gone, and the next one hasn't come. So as I started to ask, as we always do at Streb, at Slam, and with Pop Action, we ask questions that seem, so unquestionably true, it doesn't occur to you to ask them. And this was a wrangly machine, so that always happens because everything Streb has ever done is a prototype, and we use a lot of force and a lot of utter impact hits, and so we break the machine. So that's always riddled our capacity to go forward at a faster, more graceful rate, which I've wedded myself to all these 40 years. And so these drawings really demonstrate, you probably can't see them, but you can imagine that I draw out the questions I have. So perhaps somebody is really going from upstage and it's a line of people that are arriving from the edges, and they get there and they go and they land on the center plug, which is turning, and it rolls them off in various actually non-predictive ways. Okay, so this is a rotating, this inner plug is rotating clockwise, and the outer plug is rotating counterclockwise, and the dancers are essentially arriving in a straight line upstage and downstage. What happens is that the three people in the middle plug start to move because, they start to move out of sync with the other 4, 2 upstage, 2 downstage, and then everybody just starts doing a simple quarter pivot. And what I found so moving was the dancers actually just being where they were, which initially was a perfect vertical straight line with all 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 dancers. And because the 2 rotating machines were going the exact same speed. And then the center plug sped up and disrupted the trio on the plug from the quartet on the donut, and then they started to pivot quarter, quarter, quarter. And you saw this juxtaposition, very formal really in so many ways, of what it meant to change your facing. That's all you were doing, but you were in a different physical domain because one was going clockwise and the other was going counterclockwise, and they started to accelerate one then the other and mix up the rates, still doing the very, very same thing. And what's so alarming to me about that was how filled with content it was in a way that you wouldn't expect. one of the interesting things about getting what I thought was a perfect machine built, so in depth, the capacity of that machine had so many potential questions you could ask of it. And this is the kind of machine that for me would be more like a piano or any musical instrument where you could build and draw and craft 100,000 songs. So every time I decided to ask another question, and this had to do with you run into the outside edge of the inside circle as it's turning really fast, and then you do it around the world onto the donut. And every time somebody would do that, they'd run from a different spot and then have to be able to aim their spot right and their timing perfectly. If they paused too long, they'd land on someone who was already on the outside edge. But what was so critically exciting about this is sometimes a question that I imagine what the answer would be, which is usually very rarely true, would demonstrate a whole nother arena of information that we would then try and dig into and go into this sort of whirligig of confusion, which is always, it's wonderful to walk away from a rehearsal or a session with dancers who are spectacular. Because when I turn around and have to look through my notes to figure out what I'm saying, the dancers, led by Cassandra Joseph currently as an associate artistic director and the head of the curriculum at the Pop Action School at SLAM, who has been there 14 years, is doing something, as Jackie is doing something, as Daniel is doing something that I would have never thought of here. But what my curiosity is about the invention of machinery, and I believe dancers, dance, let's just say action, needs machines. The body is just not that interesting or surprising. I mean, if you really asked yourself, what could the body do that I just would never expect it to do, you would have to say, not that much. So